Right. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon for those of you where it's afternoon. We're really excited to have you all here. Welcome to AI Gold Rush, Mining Value in Mitigating Risk. My name is Patrick Bryden, and I'm with the Confidential team. And I'm just here to provide a quick overview of the webinar and then kick it off, help kick off the discussion. So without further ado, I just wanted to go through a very short housekeeping slide, and then we'll get started with the discussion. So quick agenda. We have our housekeeping. I'll hand it over to my colleague Corinne, who will do some introductions, and we'll dive headfirst into the discussion. Have some time for questions as they come up, and then we'll just share some next steps following this webinar. So the housekeeping, I know we've all been on 1,000 webinars, so we've all seen this before, but this session will be recorded and we will share it following the webinar. So if you can only stay for half of it, or if you want to share it with your colleagues, no problem, you'll be able to do so. Please ask your questions in the chat. We'll do our best to answer them during the discussion or at the end. And if you have a specific question about something you had here that you wanted to dive a little bit deeper in, our contact information will be shared following the webinar, and you're more than welcome to ask it then. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Corinne, who's going to kick things off.
Awesome. Thanks, Patrick. Good morning or afternoon, everyone. So today we are joined by three wonderful panelists. We have Jaemin Kim. She is the SVP of Emerging Technologies at Marsh. Jaemin helps Marsh clients to understand and navigate risks that arise with the convergence of new and existing technologies. She advises Fortune 100 companies and is a frequent speaker on navigating opportunities and risks related to emerging technologies, such as artificial intelligence, blockchain technology, and digital assets. Jaemin also has extensive experience working with startups, previously leading capital advisory services at the Innovation Hub, and she supported over 1,400 startup companies. And then we also have Sam Malkin. Sam is the lead solution architect at Hand Business Solutions, where he spent several years as a pre-sales and consultancy team focused on complex data challenges. With a deep expertise across industries such as manufacturing, banking, finance, local government, and healthcare, Sam helps organizations strengthen their security posture through tailored solutions. We're also joined by Karim El-Dafraoui. Karim is the co-founder and CTO at Confidencial. Prior to that, he was a principal computer scientist at the Computer Science Laboratory, SRI. Karim has authored over 100 scientific works with 31 granted and over 10 pending patents. His research and development focuses on secure and privacy-preserving computation, computer-aided verification of cryptographic algorithms and protocols, and security in cyber-physical embedded systems. His research has been funded by the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, the Department of Homeland Security, the National Science Foundation, the U.S. Air Force, General Motors, amongst many others. And his work has received the 2024 Test of Time Award. My name is Corinne Watchman. I lead the solution consulting team at Confidential, and I work with enterprise clients worldwide on implementing data protection solutions that are user-friendly and bridge the gaps that currently enterprises face between security and usability. So with that, let's get started with the first segment of conversation. So we're going to be essentially taking a look at the use of AI broadly within the enterprise, and then we're going to be diving into the complexities that might bring in terms of data governance, and some solutions and tips and tricks that enterprises might think about when implementing Gen AI and how to secure the data within it. So let's get started with the first segment of conversation, taking a broad look at the growing use of AI within the enterprise. So I'm going to sort of ask this open-ended question. So how are companies leveraging AI and agents to accelerate productivity?
I'll stick my hand up and kind of give you my thoughts on what I'm seeing. So we already had a little chat around the kind of use of it and how I'm coming around to adopting more AI in my own organization, as well as seeing all of the organizations that I work with start to adopt it. And the main theme that I'm seeing is just efficiency gains. Um, AI agents, AI bots, these large language models, and also the tools that we've all got access to, the commonly available tools, that they're doing the jobs that we don't want to do. So it's taking notes. Karim and I were just talking about how, terrible I am at writing software, but I can get a chat GPT to give me a loop or an if statement, and basically make my life easier. How to summarize data sets and analyze data sets, and make everyday humans' lives easier so that they can focus on things which are often more rewarding. I think that's the biggest trend I'm seeing. And I will caveat that with that's often not a sanctioned use either. I think some of that summarization is not by an organization saying use AI to do some of that. It's human beings naturally being inquisitive and understanding that those tools exist, and sort of saying, well, I can make my life easier or make myself seem more intelligent perhaps when I compose an email by putting this through Grammarly or a tool like that. So cutting corners, I think, is probably the easiest summarization in terms of what I'm seeing and adopting myself anyway.
I'll add to that by saying, since ChatGPT launched back in late November 2022, so that's a couple of years, 2 years ago and a few months ago now. Initially, in working with our clients at Marsh across virtually every industry, what I saw initially was hesitance to leverage generative AI because of the perceived fears, perceived unknowns and uncertainties when it comes to risk. And so I would say 2 years ago, there was more of a focus on back-end office use cases and sandboxed environments. And over the last 2 years, I've seen a shift among organizations to focus increasingly on customer-facing use cases. So everything from, for example, the healthcare industry, using generative AI tools to help with, to Sam's point, summarizing meeting notes, to helping generate differential diagnoses. In the financial services sector, wealth managers using, GPT-esque tools to more efficiently access very dense volumes of financial data to better service their own customers. In marketing departments everywhere, using generative AI to create content and run new ideas and campaigns and such. And so I think we're seeing a shift over time where organizations are realizing if they don't leverage generative AI tools, they will be left behind. But today, I still see a lot of fear, quite frankly, around the perceived unknowns when it comes to mitigating the corresponding risks.
These are all great points, and I think a very interesting point for me is the role open source plays. Like, I'm hearing a lot of customers, and when we talk to them, they try obviously the more advanced models, the services, but they're also sometimes trying to see what they can replicate with the open source models and frameworks. And the space has been moving so fast. I mean, obviously, a week ago, not as many were talking about DeepSeek. The first to drop it, but I mean, you just have to think about how to navigate such, I guess that's the title, the gold rush. So I think something important, like, who knows what's going to happen here? It's very hard to tell. But I mean, the basics and fundamentals will stay the same. So I mean, I think you resort to getting the fundamentals right and then try to adapt as best as you can. But chasing the latest shiny object is just unattainable, and nobody can keep up with it, even the biggest organization.
I think there's certainly, and you summarized it brilliantly, I think, Jamin, there. It's almost like a FOMO, fear of missing out. My own directors are saying to me, where can we make better use of AI tooling? How can we make our support to customers better? How can we learn? AI learns itself, but how can we learn by AI learning from the things that we've seen? And actually, that fear of missing out of my sort of customers saying, I've got all this data that I've held on for years and years and years, and you've helped me keep secure, but now there is money to be made from the data and the open source tooling and developing our own models and algorithms. How do I do that? I've got all this stuff here. I want to run it through something. How do I do it? And they're not always asking how do I do it safely, because they actually want to be on this upward trajectory of however much GDP across the world is going to benefit from the use of AI. They all want to be part of that. So how can I get these models across the data that I hold? Because I know there's something good in there that can ultimately make me some more money, make me more profitable, make my life easier. So where people were perhaps more like myself and a little bit reticent, I think organizations have been driven, financial directors are saying, how can we use these tools? Everybody wants a piece of the pie, don't they?
Yeah, and it's not funny, but it's interesting you say that, because we look to the UK and the EU as being more regulated in that space. And if you're saying they're willing to circumvent the risk to sort of get the outcomes and kind of get on that wagon of not being left behind, what is the rest of the world kind of doing? And do we think that existing laws like GDPR, HIPAA, CCPA are sufficient to regulate the use of AI, or does there need to be more thought for kind of regulating the use of AI and the data that essentially goes within it?
I don't want to steal all the airtime, but as a sort of European, well, ex-European, obviously we voted to leave. I kind of always feel like on these things I have a right to talk about privacy laws and things like that. And actually I'm a little bit on the fence here. I haven't quite worked out what I think. So having read the EU AI Act that we put out, would have been year before last, I think now, because we're 2025. There's also, ISO standard, I think is 42001, which is the use of AI management and things like that. For me, they all focus on things like poisoning AI and efficacy within AI models, and sort of the creation and making sure that they don't discriminate and things like that. What they don't do is kind of build on the stuff that GDPR and the CCPA and those that followed suit did in terms around the data and keeping the data secure. And one thing that I always say to my customers is, why is an AI identity any different to a human being or another system when it comes to data protection and data security? You're almost being blinded by the lights by sort of saying, well, this is artificial intelligence, so I have to treat it differently. GDPR law focuses on the data, not the source that data is going to. We saw a similar thing happen with the cloud, like, oh, we need to do cloud security. Well, you need to do data security, actually. We saw things like, identity and access management and all of these things. But same, shadow IT, cloud, large language model, AI, whatever it is. The rules say keep the data safe. It doesn't matter where it's going to or where it's coming from. That's my opinion anyway. I'd be keen to get all of yours.
I mean, I broadly agree, Sam. That I've also perceived that there is a tendency to think new technology, therefore we need new laws, we need new insurance. And I think the more appropriate framing or the more appropriate question to ask is, has the new technology created risks or circumstances that we just haven't seen before that require, in this case, new laws and new regulations? For the most part, personally, I don't think we need, an entirely new body of regulatory text or legal text just for AI, with some caveats. So I think the intellectual property space is one that's rife with some new unprecedented questions. So for example, the jury's still out on whether it's legal or not legal to take IP protected data and train generative AI systems without having sought appropriate permission. And there's also a question out there on the output data side, for example, if I use, ChatGPT or Claude, what have you, to create content and then put in some of my own human time, kind of reconfiguring it, how much of that can I own? And so I think in the IP space, we have some new legal questions, but around data privacy, data security, we already have a pretty robust, foundational set of existing laws that, should apply to any circumstance, whether or not AI is used.
You brought all very good points. I do agree on some of them, but some I think we do need new ones. So on the ones that I agree on and that ties back to what I said, like let's get the basics right. So I mean, there's nothing more basic about data protection, and that has been an issue before. It's still an issue. Maybe now the speed at which we need to and the scale, it's going to be orders of magnitude higher. But I think there is an interesting change with the role of open source. As I mentioned, what's fascinating about the space is how open source has been advancing fast and how nobody can afford to ignore it, and everyone's experimenting with it. So in the US also a couple of years ago, there has been a conversation, an executive order that seems to hint towards software liability. So now with the decision making happening with AI or in hybrid settings, that's going to raise a big question. If I'm let's say a CISO, and I'm using obviously these AI tools to make decisions, and something goes wrong that results in who's liable? Whoever did the model, me as a CISO and operator. I don't think we have answers for this, and we're going to figure them out. I think the liability issue, ties you from Marsh, Jamin, the insurance part, the cyber insurance, AI insurance. I don't think we have figured these things out. There was the software bill of materials. Now, if you work with the government, you are required to have a software bill of materials for your products. Now we're having an AI bill of materials and how they sort of tie together the supply chain. I think these need actually more technical solutions, which lag and will be developed, hopefully, in being developed currently. But there's going to be some regulations that has to be, and obviously, in the US, look, I'm Silicon Valley here, it's move fast and break things. I am not in favor of regulation, especially if the technology hasn't been developed yet. So what are you regulating? But I don't think it needs to be attacked from both sides.
Just responding to your point, Karim, around who will be liable for what, I think the concept of strict liability, which isn't new, will play an increasing role as we go forward, especially because, as we deal with probabilistic systems where increasingly it's going to be very difficult to precisely pinpoint, was it the prompt that I put in that inadvertently led to whatever, misinformation that got released into the world, or was it the algorithm or the training data set? Sometimes we will just never know. And so I am actually increasingly seeing the concept of strict liability play a role. For example, in the US, the EEOC, the regulatory entity that governs employment practices, has come out and said, any organization that uses any kind of AI tool for employment practice use cases will be held responsible for, in the event of alleged discriminatory outcomes.
Discrimination,
and so that doesn't mean that now the AI model developer or someone further up the supply chain won't also be held responsible, but it does, put the responsibility squarely on the shoulders of the organization as the end user as well, indicating they can't just point their finger at someone else.
Yeah, that sounds actually. So let me try to bring the conversation towards maybe something. I would love to know from your perspective, what do you think is missing? If there are new platforms or technologies to be developed in the next 2 years, what do you think from your perspective is the big missing pieces for the safer use or efficient use of AI?
From like a legal perspective or just
Yeah,
generally?
from your perspective in terms of what you're seeing with these liability issues.
Yeah, I think, we've started to see strict liability measures be rolled out, but it's not in all cases clear. So, coming back to the unprecedented legal questions around who owns what IP, and even if I own my IP when it's used for training purposes, is that allowed or not? I think, without data and without IP, there is no AI. And so I
Yeah.
think that the most fundamental question is who owns what data, and does my ownership of this piece of data prevent someone else from using said data? To what degree can I use these newly created advanced tools to create my own original content and call it my own? And I think increasingly, I mean, we've already seen a lot of litigation come up in this space around IP rights, data privacy, data security. I think we're always going to come back to the question, who owns the data and what does that ownership enable me to have rights to?
So over here in again Europe/UK, we've seen some new legislation sort of come in early part of this year, and there's a European Resiliency Act coming in, and what that's doing is it's identifying your third parties, your supply chain, and the risk that they impose upon you. Now, there's no specifics in terms of artificial intelligence or whose obligation it is to keep the kind of data safe, but there is a framework in place for kind of reporting, outages, and where you rely upon someone else's model, perhaps within your own product that you then provide to a customer, which means that there is, I guess, a clearer reporting chain in terms of whose responsibility it is. It's not specific to AI, but we're certainly seeing, from the European Union, an increased focus on our interlinked supply chains and how, hyperscalers provide all of this stuff to us and give us the the compute power to run the models in, perhaps, but who is at fault when something goes wrong, and where does the reporting obligation lie, and I guess ultimately who gets fined. And I suspect, like with a few of these things, the US, Canada, etc., will look and perhaps follow suit with something similar when it comes to producing actual legislation enforceable by law.
Absolutely. Not to change too much from the legislation conversation, but I guess we came into the second segment, which is really the complexities that come with data governance in the Gen AI space. And one thing that we get asked a lot when we work with clients, or that people are thinking about, is access to customer data. Historically, there's been, if you work in legal, there's ethical walls, and systems have been in place to essentially put boundaries around customer data so only certain people can access it. But that becomes increasingly difficult with things like Copilot or with AI agents that now can access all different parts of data at scale across any system. So I guess what are you guys seeing in terms of complexities there and challenges that we face in terms of customer data?
One of the challenges that I see now, and I suspect we will see for some time, is different customers have different requirements when it comes to how their data is treated. And so, as we increasingly see all organizations adopt and use generative AI-driven tools, it becomes a bit of a headache to figure out how do we treat X customers' data differently from Y customers' data. And I've seen situations where, a handful of customers have required that none of their data be used in any kind of generative AI tool or environment. And so I think that kind of contractual requirement that differs from one company to another is introducing more complexities in just thinking about how we handle data and how we govern data, all the while the organization is increasingly using more and more data in order to leverage generative AI.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that problem existed. So you're asking the complexity. So data protection, data governance, rights management, there's a new category, data security posture management. That has existed in the last years. I think now you have at least an order of magnitude increase in complexity in the amount of data. We already know that unstructured data from 2 years ago was 80% of the data in an enterprise, and it's doubling every 18 months, especially in the banking and financial sector. And I think now, with more being generated from these agents and models and being exchanged, it just increases the speed at which the data is generated and exchanged. I'd like to think of it that there's like 3 steps. There's the data in terms of AI, data, model, and then the usage. So you will need a governance framework and collection of more audits to understand, first of all, what's happening. And obviously, you're going to use AI to parse that amount of data.
To do it quicker because you don't want to do it. Yeah.
Of course. And then it's sort of like layers of the complexity. But I mean, otherwise, we're really flying in the dark. So there's a need, I think, for more platforms to tackle the data problem itself, as Jamie mentioned, and be programmable to be able to respond to the different customer requirements.
Yeah, I really hope that 2025 is the year that everyone gets a budget for a data governance program, regardless of the driver. So whether that's for understanding the use of AI tooling, whether that's for delivering compliance, or whether it's just for, security spend. I work for an organization that solely solves data security problems, so I'm probably a little biased there, but I think you pretty much summed it up, Karim, in terms of the way that I think, is probably not that different to the way you think, given the software that you created. But discover what you have, where you have it. It's going to be doubling, it's going to be tripling. You're going to have numerous amounts of information, and not all of that information is important. Some things are, there's some stuff on my laptop which is completely irrelevant and should probably be deleted, but there's also some very, very sensitive stuff, not just to me, but to my organization. What does Copilot have access to? What does Sam have access to then put into a prompt that goes to a public LLM model? It's an ongoing thing. I think there's an element of education involved in that as well. As I said at the outset, I think not all AI or large language model use is sanctioned. It's not built by your own internal companies. It's people who want to get efficiency gains. And I don't think we should stop them from doing that. I think we should empower them to do it safely. And to do that, we need to know what data they're feeding into these things, particularly where they're public models, because we don't get the outputs in the back end. And if you look at traditional cybersecurity tooling, firewalls don't really understand a large language model prompt. It just sees it as a HTTP packet. It goes out, comes back. It might know that it's going to a source address associated with one of those tools, but what's inside it? So understanding your data, sometimes classifying your data, doing things like encrypting your data or encrypting parts of your unstructured data, which is a really cool feature of a certain piece of technology I know of. Doing things like that to help your users make the right choices. I think, rather than going back to a world where we kind of rule with an iron fist and say, no, you can't use these tools because they are dangerous. They're just trying to get their job done, and I actually think helping them to use them for the right ways, the right outputs, rather than blindly dumping every Excel spreadsheet that comes across their desk into one of these tools because it can do it quicker than they can, and giving them a nudge in the right direction through pieces of software is by far the way that we tackle this problem, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I guess piggybacking on that, there's a wide array of tools that organizations have in place. Some probably use them better than others. I think a lot of people are just implementing their data governance strategy and DSPM tools. So do you think that, what is out there kind of suffices for these new complex challenges, or maybe some new emerging tools? Like what should organizations really think about when they think about protecting data in this new era?
I could talk for hours on this, and as I say, I don't want to steal all of the airtime. I'm undecided. I was doing some research on a company who are producing what they were calling an LLM firewall the other day. But as far as I could tell, it was just an evolution of the same, I guess, policy-driven, outcome-based type of technology that we'd seen, just more focused around LLM prompts. But effectively, what is my destination? What is my data? What's the destination? What is the source? Other attributes, and building an outcome. I believe that there is enough there. We see CASB, SASE, SSE, DSPM type tools now have artificial intelligence as a category. So we can start to help police that. But in summary, I suppose I don't quite know yet
I can
whether
jump
I
here.
think it's sufficient. Yeah.
I think it's two. I mean, one, I think when you analyze the use cases, as I said, data, model, and usage, all three need governance, all three phases, and all three need protection. You're gonna have compliance. I think there are tools, as you mentioned, that you can repurpose, and they have AI use cases, and we're seeing the vendors do that. But I think you'll also find the need for new tools. So as you mentioned, a normal firewall wouldn't understand what a prompt is. But then there's whole category now of red teaming of prompts, and because you can exploit prompt injection. People have demonstrated that you can cause a model to behave in a certain way and sort of circumvent guardrails that are either put in the model or in an application firewall, if you do clever tricks. So that's a whole new category. I think that when you had application firewalls, but they were more static. I think with AI and these LLMs and agents, the level of intelligence and dynamic behavior and randomness there is much higher than in your normal application, and that requires new tools. And that's where I think a lot of the complexity and the speed at which these things operate. So it's both. Like, you can repurpose some of your tools, and you will need new tools. But in either case, as I think I see something in the Q&A, I think everybody can all agree data is very important to the creation of these models, usage of them, and that's, I think, a very big piece of the puzzle moving forward.
Yeah, I think,
Yeah.
Jamin, you said exactly that point earlier. And I always refer back to, garbage in, garbage out. It works the exact same way if it's sensitive data in, sensitive data out. If it's something you're trying to protect, if it's been in, then it can come back out.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm actually seeing a couple questions that are related to what we're just discussing in the chat around data governance and compliance. It can actually become very costly, and so for small organizations, startups, for example, there is a question around what are some practical steps or quick wins that such smaller organizations can implement to ensure that we're applying industry standards from day one in accordance with GDPR, CCP, et cetera. And then correspondingly, what kinds of metrics or success, KPIs can such startups track to convince investors, other stakeholders that the cost of proper data governance is worth the investment? I'll start out by saying I actually think smaller entities, or actually startups in particular, have somewhat of an advantage that larger organizations don't have. Most large organizations cannot tell me where all their data sits, let alone whether they've earmarked which data is personal versus confidential. The larger the organization, the more the bureaucracy there is, and correspondingly the more complex their data storage and handling becomes. And so for startups, I think there's an advantage where startups can start from day one. And for example, mapping what kind of data they're collecting, storing, who has access to which pieces of data, coupled with, there's various vendors out there that provide compliance tools, often driven by AI as well, to help detect potential violations of GDPR, CCPA, what have you, in real time. And of course, there is that additional cost. And I think first for investors, a key metric that you could quote is the regulatory fines and penalties that would come with potential violations, and they would add up quite quickly depending on the circumstances. So I think that would be a key metric to track.
Yeah, I was going to mention the fines as well. So there's a couple of websites out there that I just keep an eye on that list, the major fines and for what reason, as it applies to CCPA and GDPR and the other things around the world. Those are enough to make any director's eyes water if they were kind of levied upon them. Jamin also mentioned, as a startup, you can do a lot of that groundwork and not have to go retrospectively through. I'll be candid and call it can often be a mess of I've got this data, I don't know why I've got this data, I don't know what this data is, but I'm so terrified of removing it or deleting it or archiving it that I just never have done. So if you can get things done within the first couple of years of your organization growing and going through that growth, then so be it. Similarly, absolutely, there are multiple pieces of software out there that will help you measure compliance. And also having compliance is a good measure in terms of people doing business with you. We have to fill in lots and lots of pieces of documentation now around, do we have SOC 2 compliance? Do we have ISO compliance? Do we have cyber essentials for the UK government? All these different things. Those are strings to our bow as an organization. And if someone's choosing who to do business with, are they going to trust the people who have gone through all the audits, who have proven that they, treat data in the way that it's supposed to be, or, just cost alone or whatever their other kind of metrics for selecting a business partner are. So there are many, many reasons to get compliance, achieve compliance and keep compliance. I don't think I've missed any, but yeah.
Very good points. And I think my view on this, and it's also biased because of background and what I do, I think what we're gonna see is that cyber security and AI, they're gonna be very close, they're attached to the hip. I don't think you can treat AI, because if what everyone is saying is true, and that 2025 and 26 is going to be the year of the agents, whatever agents mean, they mean different things for different people. I think the future is going to be hybrid. Like we now have hybrid cloud, you have multi-cloud, you're going to have hybrid AI, hybrid environment, actually. Humans with AI, I don't think that's a controversial statement. Everybody will have assistants. You're going to have coding assistant. You said customer facing. You're seeing more on the front end. So you're going to have these, I like actually the term virtual worker more than agent.
Karim, human beings being augmented by automated processes is nothing new. Like I think I wrote my first Excel macro when, I had a full head of hair, barely out of high school, and I was getting things to do things automatically to make my life easier. It's a historical want, isn't it? To make our lives easier. Absolutely.
So then whatever cybersecurity issues we saw, we're gonna see them again in these virtual environment. It's just this, I think the scale and the speed. I was talking yesterday to another cyber founder. It's unimaginable. I mean, it's something we've never seen before, and that scares me a little bit because, unfortunately, I think it's much easier to attack than defend. That has always been true, and I think it's going to continue to be true. And the attackers are using these tools, and they're going to have an advantage that I'm not sure we're going to be able to match. And that's why I said the only way forward is to get the basics right. And I mean, obviously, there's nothing more basic more than like data protection. Understand your data, the posture of your data, where it is, monitor it. But also, I think we need to have a mind shift to start to be a little bit proactive, because it's going to be too late if something happens. And the scale and the magnitude of it, it's like I'm still waiting for the day where I mean, we know that people have posted in ChatGPT IP and things they shouldn't. But one day somebody is going to, like, there's going to be a big leak through
when
LLMs and
ChatGPT has a
agents.
0 day, for example. Yeah.
I'm
What
actually more
happens then?
concerned about in the enterprise, in the who know. I mean, we know there are backdoors in these models. I mean, there's a lot of research to demonstrate you can have backdoor. So imagine this scenario: you're using open source because you cannot afford to not do that inside the enterprise, and you'd have the guardrails and the firewalls, the application, but the attackers are in the network, and they're going to be strategically exploiting some of these backdoors to, through the agents, leak an amount of sensitive information that, like, it's just attacks and scales we haven't seen before. And I hope to think that people are thinking ahead and about these issues, but unfortunately, the industry is reactive. Yeah.
I agree with you, Karim, that cybersecurity and AI are and will continue to be even more joined at the hip. I would add that I think, cybersecurity is just one set of risk controls that are necessary for, the good guys to kind of beat the bad guys, if you will, in the sense that an organization can have the most robust set of cybersecurity controls ever pertaining to any kind of generative AI, agentic AI tool usage and going forward too. None of that robust set of cybersecurity controls is going to matter the day one of your employees goes home and opens up their personal device and starts entering, proprietary company information into a public version of one of these tools, thereby handing over the IP rights over to whatever company is the developer of the AI system, and of course unleashing said proprietary data into the public domain for anyone with the chops to try to reverse engineer what trains the next version of said public model. And so what I've been advising our clients at Marsh has been that the CISO absolutely is one of the critical leaders who needs to be at the table with thinking about proactive risk management, developing resiliency against generative AI risks. But in conjunction at the table, you also need legal and compliance from a regulatory perspective. You also need the CHRO. Increasingly, this is becoming a cultural issue where, an analogy I can give is when organizations went from using fax machines to email to do ordinary business, it still took a number of years before your average employee just got it. That he or she shouldn't use their personal Gmail account to do work business. That was a cultural shift that was necessary. In a similar vein, that's where we need to get to, where the average employee just gets it, that he or she shouldn't use a public version of generative AI or AI agents for that matter on their personal device in order to do company work. And so personally, I believe it requires robust AI risk management requires a cross-functional leadership approach where the CHRO is broadly aware of, technical controls that are in place and which employees have access to what kinds of data, which kinds of AI tools, and understands how to target those subset of employees with appropriate training and awareness and a cultural push.
So how how many of the organizations that you speak to, Jamin, if any, do you feel are even halfway to that level of maturity as it currently stands? Because I can give you the number that I talk to, and it's pretty much zero. You know, what's your opinion on how people are? Because I agree, you know, it's, as I already said, you know, education has a large way to go in this, and you know, enforcing actual sort of policy rather than you know, technological policy. um Give me a figure.
Yeah, it's a very broad spectrum. Maybe 5 to 10%
Yeah.
of the organizations, and I speak with a lot across different industries. You know, there were like the outlier, very early mover leaders who had a governance policy, acceptable use policy, enforcement mechanism, rollout, comms, all of that in place within, I think, like 3 months of ChatGPT launching back in 2022. Most organizations are still figuring out what their governance program needs to look like. And so, you know, I would hope that we can learn from historical events. Like we've been there with, for example, cyber risk, where back in the day, people talked a lot about cyber risk and it was a hot topic in organizations, but it wasn't until there were, you know, incidents like NotPetya and various ransomware incidents that made it real, for a lot of organizations, although not all. And then we started seeing, you know, approaches to risk resiliency and purchasing insurance and other activities. So it's a matter of when, not if, as Karim alluded to earlier. It is hard, I think, for organizations to proactively approach this while we have yet to see a large incident play out.
So I don't want to cut this off, but I know we have about 10 minutes left. And we did have a few speed round questions and call to actions here to round out this conversation. But I think jumping off that point of, you know, what can we do today to sort of protect against, you know, whether you're at your working, you know, at the office or you bring stuff home, you know, is that more of a cultural shift, or are there solutions that you can, you know, use to enforce that, you know, perhaps at the data level? Not to have a layup there, Karim, but I'll start with you, Karim. You know, if you were appointed Chief AI Officer at, you know, an organization, what would be your number one non-negotiable around data governance?
I mean, first step is having a catalog or classifying, knowing what data you have where, and just even monitoring it. Next best thing is that to have the access control properly configured and protections that also prevent exfiltration. I think that will go a long way. But then when it comes to AI, the same applies. The same way you need a catalog and awareness of what data you have, you should also know where AI is used. I heard the statistic from somebody from Palo Alto last weekend saying, on the average large organization, they found like tens of thousands of LLM instances running on people's machines, in the cloud. I don't think organization like there's shadow AI now. Those two steps are the first two, I would say, data governance and in some sense like the use of these models.
And then I guess, Sam, for you on the same vein, you know, if you were in charge of AI and security, what would you need to have in place to ensure that, you know, your most valuable data, whether it's IP or customer data, didn't get, you know, misused or leaked in any way outside?
Yeah, so I don't want to repeat too much what Karim just said, but you know, him and I, we move in the same circles, we think in similar ways. You know, I'm often guilty of saying that you can't protect something if you don't know where it is. I think all three of us gave examples of organizations that have no idea what they've got. So how are they going to start protecting it? So, you know, kind of start with understanding what it is that you're trying to police, because if you don't know where it's going or where it's come from, you know, you can't solve the problem. I work off a bit of a framework which it starts with kind of discover slash understand, classify. So, you know, you can differentiate between two different bits of information and then protect. And that protect is as open-ended as an organization wants it to be.
Absolutely. And then J-Man, I think we heard a little bit of yours previously, so I'm going to give you one that's kind of pointed for your expertise. What role does cyber insurance play in the AI-driven security strategy? So I guess how you know, is cybersecurity changing with the new risks that are introduced, or you know, is it kind of staying the same? And you know, they're not new risks; they're just you know, used in a different way.
Yeah, so just really want to quickly add on to Karim and Sam's points around data encryption. I think organizations should assume some of their sensitive proprietary data is going to be leaked at some point. And so the best way to proactively get ahead of that is encrypting your data so that even if someone tries to exfiltrate your data, they won't have value to be gained in that. So in terms of what role cyber insurance can play in AI-driven security strategies, I would say there's two broad roles. AI-driven security strategies still come attached with the perceived unknowns and uncertainties around AI, which means insurance, cyber insurance, various other forms of insurance can go a long way in providing that peace of mind, if you will, enabling companies to recognize that when things go wrong, it's still going to be okay up to a certain threshold, so long as they've purchased appropriate insurance to kick into gear for the when, not if. The second role I think that cyber insurance can play in AI-driven security strategies, though, is in ensuring that the insurance incentivizes implementing proactive, appropriate risk controls. And so I think a big role that the insurance industry can play in all of this is in ensuring that we're asking the appropriate underwriting questions and requesting appropriate risk controls to be in place where, for example, for a good set or robust set of proactive risk controls that pertain to generative AI, perhaps you get a reduced premium because the underwriter now gets to, you know, place a better risk onto their accounts. So I think the incentives that insurance can introduce broadly to organizations using any form of AI can be quite pivotal.
Yeah, and just to ask another question on that, just to draw parallels, you know, if you're applying for home insurance, they'll ask things like, how many fire detectors do you have in your home? Do you have, you know, these types of preventative things? And they actually will reduce premiums if, you know, you have protected your home to a certain extent. Are we seeing that in the cyber insurance space yet? Or is that something that's being discussed?
It's evolving. We're beginning to see some new underwriting questions come up to that effect. You know, I should mention that cyber insurance is just one of many other lines of insurance that will be relevant to generative AI risks. It's everything from, you know, employment practices liability to directors and officers to general liability. Across the board, we are seeing underwriters ask some new questions, although I have yet to see the responses to such underwriting questions directly inform risk assessment and pricing, except in a few niche circumstances.
Yeah, okay. And then with 5 minutes left, so we'll go to the call to action. So what are the top 3 steps organizations can take today to prepare for a secure and compliant future with AI? We'll start with Karim.
Yeah, as I said, I mean, I look at it in terms of 3 phases or step: data, model, and usage. Just having the appropriate tools and understanding of what's running, what you have, and how it's being used applies at each stage. So at the data level, and then at the models, the run times for these models, collecting, I guess, information and audits about what prompts, who they're connecting to, and then the usage, where is data that's being generated sent. So you can tackle it, I guess, from the left to the right. Start with the data, secure the model, know what models people are running. That's very dangerous. I mean, Hugging Face and all this, people are pulling these models and running them locally on their machines. It's just a matter of time till you have malware being sneaking through them. Yeah,
I was listening to a RSA last year, people talking about exactly that, actually, you know, poisoning the kind of models, but also putting nasties into the models and then just hosting them on Git and saying, you know, here's a model that does this, and along comes unsuspecting employee, grabs it, downloads it, compiles it, and splat. So yeah, risky.
Awesome. I guess, Sam, you're
yeah, again, Karim and I agree all the time, but you know, embrace it, understand it, and actually enable its use, because if not, you know, people will head to GitHubs and other repos and grab their own. You know, understand what's okay for LLM use and what isn't, and write a policy around it, and then try and get some guardrails to you know, deliver that, whether that's DSPM or SSE or DLP or whatever. You know, don't just leave it up to human beings, but allow them to make a decision sometimes.
absolutely. And Jamin, just to round that one off.
Yeah, I think first, all organizations need to put in a governance structure in place at the board and senior management levels, coming back to the cross-functional leadership that's necessary in order to really address all aspects of generative AI risks. The second is to implement a very clearly communicated acceptable use policy, demonstrating to all employees, is it acceptable to use public versions of these tools on your work devices and your home devices? What's the expectations? But more importantly, an enforcement plan for that. How would you even know? And recognize you won't know all the time. So that's where training comes in. And then the third one is around data governance, especially for like the medium to larger organizations. First, figure out where your data sits and what that data consists of. To ensure that when it comes to, you know, the topic of are we compliant, you at least know what data you're dealing with, and then you can begin sifting through compliance to figure out what you need to do depending on where your business operates.
Awesome, thank you. I know we have a lot of questions. I will pass it over to Patrick. We are also coming up against time, so Patrick will let us know how we're going to answer.
Thanks, Corinne, and thanks to all of our speakers. So just with 90 seconds left, just wanted to share the next steps. We will be sharing the recording to everyone who registered, and for those who didn't register, if you only stayed for half, no sweat. If you want to share it with your colleagues, fantastic. We'll share it. As well, if you wanted to learn more about Confidential, we will share this link within the follow-up email as well. And if for those interested in exploring any kind of partnerships or want to learn more about how we can work together in the field, definitely reach out to Diana Sapienza. Diana's contact information will also be included in the follow-up email. Lastly, feel free to reply to those emails directly if you have any specific questions that didn't get answered, and I'll do my best to make sure that they get filtered to the right person at Confidential, at Marsh, or at Hand. Other than that, thanks so much for attending. It was so great to have this conversation with everyone, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar down the road. So thanks so much and have a great rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for having me. See you again soon.
Thank you, Sam.
No worries.
Yeah.